Hey everybody, coming at you again with another sprite chart. Now this one is not a new one. This is one that we did in class. This is like one that we did the last week of class before all this coronavirus stuff went down. So you should have this one tucked away in your notes. For those of you who do not, we're going to make sure that you had it in time for the AP exam on May 13th at 4 p.m. in your house. So today we're going to be going over the age of nationalism and imperialism. That's the late 19th century. We'll do a sprite on it. This is the sprite. This is the title, Age of Nationalism and Imperialism, 1848 to 1914. So for 2020, this is the last chunk of the class. And of course, you got your social, political, religious, intellectual, technological, economic, and make sure, again, to write this down. Studies show that if you write it down with your hand instead of typing it out with your fingers, you remember it much, much better. This is a great resource to have out in front of you during that AP Euro DBQ exam that you're going to have on May 13th. All right, let's get down to it. As far as the social aspects, it's pretty whittled down for this one, but we stuck to just class division. We talked about how it's the late 19th century. You've got your three basic classes. We've kissed the ancien regime goodbye. We've got upper classes, middle classes, and working classes that dominate society. They continue to dominate society today. You've got the idea of separate spheres continuing to disadvantage women, or at least to give women a domestic sphere versus a public sphere. Men are mostly in the public sphere, whereas women are relegated to the house and keeping the house and being a wife and a mother, and keeping that house a refuge for the husband, for the man. And so those are the big divisions, or the big categories within the social aspect. In the political realm, this is the great age of nationalism. And so you see unification of Germany and Italy during the late 19th century, as Germany and Italy both coalesced into one after centuries of being not one country. They suddenly become one country in a span of about 20 years, from 1860 to about 1870, give or take. And then we did these posters in class that illustrated the idea of universal male suffrage that becomes very much the thing. It's very popular to give all men the vote. We're not going to actually get in the course to the part where women get the right to vote. Most of that happens after World War I. We did get there. It's just not going to be on the exam. You've got parliaments and representative governments, as well as political parties. And remember, these serve two functions. One, they give people a voice, right? They give people a way to express their opinion to their government. But two, they also allow the government to gauge what is popular. And so if you've got a government that is mostly a monarchy, but with an advisory parliament with political parties, then you as the monarch are able to see what is popular, what do the people want, so that you can stay on their good side. Of course, then you've also got representative governments in places like Britain and France, where the most popular party wins elections and gets to do what they want. These things serve two purposes, both to represent the people, but also to give the government a gauge of what the people want from it. And then remember, this is also the period when we start to get these state-sponsored social safety nets. We first saw this in Germany under Otto von Bismarck, as he tries to undercut the popularity of the socialist parties, which works. He's a brilliant politician. He brings in old age pensions and disability insurance. So now, if you get hurt on the job, the government will help pay your bills for you until you can find something. As you get older and you get less able to work, then the government steps in and will help you save, and then help you to have money into your old age as you become a less productive worker. And these are things that we still have today here in the United States and around the world. Religiously speaking, Christianity is beginning to fade in popularity. Not to say it's not there. I mean, it's 2020 and it's still a huge factor in many countries across Europe. But it's not as popular. It's not as powerful as it once was on the political scene. You also get the rise in Zionism due to rampant anti-Semitism throughout Europe. Remember, this is the period when we see Jewish people being accepted in the early part of the late 19th century. So like 1850, 1860s, 1870s, and then in the 1880s you get an economic crash, and people are looking for somebody to blame, and the Jews become a very popular scapegoat in the 1880s and 1890s. And this is about the time that Zionism becomes really popular. That's that movement for European Jews to move from Europe and set up a nation in Palestine in the Middle East, mirroring the modern state of Israel. And in fact, this movement of Zionism is the reason for the Balfour Declaration that the British put forth after World War, or during World War One, and into the end of World War One, and then it's really after World War II that you start to see a huge movement for a Jewish homeland, which is created in the 1940s. All right. Intellectually speaking, we get a ton of isms in the 19th century, especially in the late 19th century. We got nationalism and the belief that everybody's nation is the best. And there's a ton of conflict and a ton of competition that comes out of that. You got racism. Remember that racial ideas in the 19th century are very different from our own racist ideas. Sorry, not our own racist, our own ideas of race. But remember, race in the 19th century didn't just mean something that was based on color. It meant the Irish race, the English race, the Scottish race, the French race. Each little nation was its own race. And so we see that today when you hear people talk about having German blood. It's this attempt, this pseudo-scientific attempt to make nationality scientific and to make race scientific as well. And that also plays right into social Darwinism, this idea that a nation and a race are in struggle against the other nations and races of the world for survival. Again, it's complete bunk. It's not true. It's social Darwinism. It's racism trying to be scientific. And since race is a social construction, it doesn't actually hold up. It doesn't make any sense, genetically speaking. There's very little difference between the different groups of humans around the world then and now. We got positivism, this idea of stages, which again feeds into the idea of social Darwinism and racism. Remember, positivism, these are those stages of evolution or evolutionary progression where people groups move from what Kant would have said is a more simplistic view of the world and of themselves to a more complicated view. It just so happens that the complicated view often ends with science or some area in which the Europeans currently occupy. And so the Europeans are creating theories that put themselves at the top, that make themselves the most evolutionarily advanced groups in the world. Again, social Darwinism, racism, nationalism, they're all fit into this idea of positivism, and they all feed on each other. In the realm of actual science, we see science itself moving well beyond the intuitive understanding of most people. The idea of Einstein's theory of relativity doesn't actually make a whole lot of sense. It does scientifically, but it's not intuitive sense. And then, of course, things like Freud moved well beyond the understanding, again, pushing back against the Enlightenment. Enlightenment said that people are logical, reasonable beings, and Freud said, no, there's tons of things inside you that make you do things that you don't even understand why you do them. And then, of course, radioactivity and other subatomic particles are being discovered, being experimented with. And again, once you reach down into the subatomic world, it starts to make less and less sense. Even today, there's no unifying theory between the macro world and the micro world. Um, Maybe you should figure that out and get back to me on that. So science itself, moving beyond the intuitive understanding of people, what this means is that people have put their faith in science and their belief that science will push them forward. And there's this idea that science, they don't really understand it, but it must be good. Um, and that people had created for themselves a way to explain the universe. And as we move into technologies, I'm just going to skip down here to the bottom. It's this idea that progress will always continue, that humanity will continue to evolve to a better state, and that science and technology are going to get us there. And it's really at World War I when you start to see this all come crashing down. The scientific and technological world that the Europeans had created for themselves is the very scientific and technologically advanced world that destroys the lives of so many young men in the trenches of World War I. That as you move to the other side of World War I, people begin to wonder, and then again in World War II, both of those wars go together to really help people question whether or not there is such a thing as progress. Are we moving toward something better, or are we just moving? Are we even moving? Is technology better? Does it make us better, or does it make us able to destroy more things faster? Brings a lot of the late 19th century comes into question with World War I and the end of World War I. But we're not actually going to get there in the class so much. We talked about it a little bit, but then we had to leave, and then AP changed everything. So enough about all that. Technologically speaking, 19th century, late 19th century is the second industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution had been the steam and railroad revolution. The second industrial revolution is the oil and electricity and chemicals revolution. And so, again, the modern world as we know it began to come into focus in the late 19th century. This is the era of sewers and urban redesign. This is the part where Edwin Chadwick, writes a book or a pamphlet, and publishes it to Parliament and says, "Hey, look, we got to improve the lives of workers, and here's how we could do it by installing sewers." This is Joseph Lister and his antibacterial ideas. This is Louis Pasteur and his pasteurization. This is Baron Haussmann and his redesign of Paris. All of those things are happening during the late 19th century. There's so much going on between 1848 and 1914. It's just ridiculous how many things happen and change. Telegraphs and radio make communication instantaneous. You don't have to wait for the morning and evening newspapers to find out what's going on. Radio and telegraph make it happen instantly. I can snap with that hand. There we go. And then last but not least is economic. Free market dominates. But because of the ills and wrongs of the early 19th century, when laissez-faire capitalism dominated, there's a movement in the late 19th century to float all boats. And as we said many times, people's lives start to get better around 1850. And the wealth that was concentrated so much at the top in the hands of these owners of industry begins to trickle down, begins to spread out. There are moves by governments to make the lives of workers better. We see that with disability insurance, with old age pensions, with the urban redesign program. And that's due to the influence mostly of socialism. And socialism begins to pull some of that money from the top and spread it out to the people at the bottom. And so while we have free markets, we also have governments stepping in to purposefully spread some of that wealth from the top to the bottom. And then, of course, we've still got communism bubbling right under the surface. And Marx and Engels, remember, publish their Communist Manifesto in 1848. So communism begins to coalesce in the second half of the 19th century, culminating really, I suppose, with the 1917 revolution in Russia, which we got to, but is not going to be on your exam, as the Leninist version of communism. rises up, takes over Russia, changes it to the Soviet Union, and that's going to last until 1991. And so communism is going to be a force that is growing in the late 19th century, that is going to take hold and grow exponentially in the 1900s. But that's a conversation for a different day. All right, that's the last one. That's the end of our sprite charts for this year. And that takes care of our last segment. That should make 6 sprite charts. If you have any questions, any other concerns, or hit me snags along the way, feel free to reach out and let me know. I'm happy to help. That's literally my job. And remember, May 13th, 4 p.m., that's your AP Euro exam. So take care of yourself, wash your hands, send me memes, send me songs, and I will see you guys soon. See ya.